Hi, I'm Nick, 22 years old, born and raised in Southern California. I work for a small but busy pool cleaning and maintenance company. It's not glamorous, but I love it. It keeps me fit, pays my bills, and I get to spend my days outside under the sun. My job mostly involves cleaning out debris, balancing the chemicals, and making sure the pool systems run smoothly. It's simple, straightforward, and I'm good at it. I take pride in leaving pools crystal clear. That morning was like any other. My boss sent me a new job ticket. The address was in an upscale neighborhood I knew well but had never had a job in before. Big houses, fancy cars, immaculate lawns, rich people territory. The job note said, "Client wants debris removal chemical treatment in system check. Should be an easy day." I threw my gear in the truck, punched the address into my phone, and hit the road with my usual playlist blasting. As I pulled into the long driveway, my jaw tightened a little. The place was massive Spanish-style architecture, high hedges, white stucco walls, black iron gates. I parked next to a brand new Range Rover and stepped out, taking a breath before walking up to the front door with my clipboard. I knocked, and a moment later the door opened. That's when I first saw her. She looked to be in her early 40s, but something about her didn't match her age. Tall, slim-toned, like someone who never misses her morning Pilates. Wavy chestnut hair tied loosely at the back. Casual but classy flowy white blouse, fitted linen pants, bare feet with polished nails. There was this softness in her face mixed with confidence. Her green eyes caught mine and held them just long enough to make me aware I was staring. "Hi, you must be Nick," she said with a warm, inviting smile. "Come on in. I'm Karen." "Hi, yeah, Nick. Pool service," I said, lifting my clipboard awkwardly. I was used to people barely acknowledging me before waving toward the backyard and going back inside. Karen didn't do that. Instead, she stepped back and motioned for me to come in. "Would you like something to drink first?" "Coffee, water, lemonade," she offered. I blinked, surprised. I almost declined out of habit, but something about her energy softened me. "A lemonade would be nice. Thanks." She led me through an airy living room full of natural light and expensive art out onto the patio. The pool was stunning, huge, spotless, bordered with lounge chairs and palm trees swaying in the breeze. I set my supplies down as she returned with a tall glass dripping condensation. "Here you go," she said, handing me the drink. "I know it's hot out there. I didn't want you thinking you're just the help. I appreciate people who work hard." I chuckled nervously and thanked her. We stood for a moment in that strange pause before conversation starts. "You've got a beautiful place," I offered. "Thank you. It's been a work in progress. I built a career for myself, made the money, bought the dream house, and now I'm trying to figure out what comes next," she said, laughing lightly. Then her tone shifted to something softer. "I live here alone now. It gets a little quiet, so I like having people around, even if they're just passing through." Her honesty caught me off guard. Most clients barely gave me their names. Karen seemed genuinely eager for a little company, even if just in conversation. I nodded politely and unsure what to say. "Well, I should get started," I said, setting the glass down. "Of course. I'll let you work," she smiled, stepping back but not quite leaving. I pulled on my gloves, primed the skimmer, and got to it. The pool barely needed work, just a few leaves and petals floating along the edges. I like this part, the mindless rhythm of cleaning the warm sun on my back, the peaceful sound of water lapping against the tiles. I went about testing the chlorine levels, brushing down the sides, checking the filters. The routine work helped me forget the strange tension I felt earlier. Every so often, I'd glance up and catch Karen moving about on the patio, sometimes on a call, sometimes reading on a lounger, sometimes watching me just a little too long. I shook it off as my imagination. I focused back on my work. About an hour later, I was kneeling by the pump system, wiping down the panel when her shadow crossed mine. I looked up. Karen stood above me, arms crossed, casually, eyes playful. "You really take your job seriously," she teased. "I try to be thorough," I said, smiling back, standing up and brushing my hands on my shorts. She took a small step closer. The air felt warmer. I could smell her perfume, something light, citrusy, expensive. Then she leaned in ever so slightly and whispered just loud enough for only me to hear, "You're making it hard for me to be good." I froze for a second. My brain scrambled to process whether I heard her right. There was a faint smirk on her lips, and those green eyes sparkled like she knew exactly what effect her words had. I chuckled nervously, trying to play it off with a half smile. I'll just finish up the system check. She laughed softly and turned walking back toward her lounger with a sway that now felt very intentional. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, then forced myself to focus back on the pump readings. My hands were steady, but my mind raced. What exactly had she meant? Was it a joke, a test? Did she say it to mess with me, or did she mean it? I shook my head, smiled slightly to myself, and went back to work. I had a job to finish, but I knew something about this house, this woman, this day was going to be different. The rest of the afternoon dragged on, but not because of the work. My mind kept replaying what Karen had whispered, "You're making it hard for me to be good." I had no idea if she was serious or just being playful. I didn't want to assume anything. One wrong move and I could lose my job, or worse. I kept my distance and finished the chemical treatments and pump maintenance like I would at any other house. I was rinsing my tools near the side gate when I heard footsteps behind me. "You're really dedicated," Karen said warmly. I turned around. She was standing just a few feet away, arms folded gently across her chest, the light breeze catching her hair. "I like to do a good job," I answered simply. "I can tell," she said, holding my gaze for a second too long. "Listen, would you mind coming inside for a minute before you go? I, um, I made dinner. It would be a shame to waste it." "I made enough for two. It's just my way of saying thanks. You've been incredibly polite and professional." I hesitated. Normally, I never mix business with anything personal, but her tone was kind, sincere. I didn't sense any pressure, only a genuine invitation. "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be, honestly," she smiled. "I don't get a lot of company these days." I stood there weighing the decision. My stomach answered for me, but I'd skipped lunch, and the idea of a home-cooked meal was too good to pass up. "Okay," I said, "just for a little bit." She beamed and motioned for me to follow her inside. I gathered my things, locked my truck, and stepped into her home. The inside of the house was as beautiful as the outside: high ceilings, soft neutral tones, elegant furniture, and warm ambient lighting. There were personal touches, photos of her travels, tasteful art, a large vase of fresh flowers on the table. She led me to the dining area where the table was already set for two, candles flickered softly. A bottle of wine sat unopened in the center. The smell of grilled vegetables and roasted chicken filled the room. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," I said, genuinely impressed. "Nonsense," she replied. "I love cooking. It relaxes me." I sat down awkwardly, feeling out of place in my work clothes. Karen brought over two plates and poured sparkling water for both of us. We ate and talked, and for the first time that day, I relaxed. The conversation flowed easily. She told me about her career in real estate, how she had spent the last 20 years building her business, traveling and focusing on success. "I never settled down," she confessed with a soft laugh. "I was always chasing the next deal, the next property, the next goal. Now I have everything I ever thought I wanted, except anyone to share it with." I nodded, listening carefully. It wasn't what I expected from someone like her. She had this polished, confident exterior, but underneath was a real sense of loneliness. I told her about my job, how I'd started pool work straight out of high school, how I loved working outdoors, and how I rarely had time for dating or even hanging out with friends. Karen laughed softly. "So we're both workaholics in our own way." "I guess so." I smiled. We finished eating and she leaned back in her chair, swirling her glass of water thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something, Nick," she said. "Have you ever done something completely out of character? Something spontaneous, risky with a complete stranger?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Honestly, no. I'm not the wild type. I've always had responsibilities. I work long days. I don't go out much." Her expression softened. "That's a shame. Life's too short not to have a little fun now and then." I shrugged with a small smile. "I guess I've never really thought about it." Karen tilted her head and gave me a playful grin. "Well, maybe tonight's your chance." I stared at her, confused but intrigued. "What do you mean?" She stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the evening sky. "I don't mean anything crazy," she said, turning back toward me. "I just mean letting go a little, being spontaneous, doing something different for once." You're young. You should experience life even just for one night. I sat back in my chair, unsure how to respond. The idea of spending more time with her outside of the job felt risky but oddly exciting. Karen walked back to the table and leaned against it, her arms crossed casually. Look, I get it. I'm older. I'm a client, and this might seem weird to you. I'm not asking for anything you don't want. But if you're open to it, I thought it might be fun to just go out, hit a bar walk by the beach drive with the windows down and music blasting. Just live a little. No expectations, just two people who could use a break from the routine. I stared at her for a long moment. The rational side of me screamed to politely decline and walk out the door. But another part of me, the part that had been stuck in the same boring pattern day after day, was tempted. I smiled faintly. I don't even know what to say. She laughed softly. Just say yes or no. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. Okay, yes. Karen's eyes lit up. Really? Yeah, I said. You're right. I never do anything unexpected. Maybe it's time. Perfect, she said, clearly excited. Go home and get changed out of your work clothes and meet me back here in an hour. We'll take my car. We'll leave your truck here so you don't have to worry about it. I nodded, still not entirely believing what I had just agreed to. All right, I'll be back soon. I stood up and she walked me to the door. As I stepped outside, she smiled warmly and added, Don't make me wait too long, Nick. I walked back to my truck, my head spinning. This was definitely not how I thought the day would go. I started the engine, glanced back at the house once more, and pulled out of the driveway. I had exactly 1 hour to figure out what I had just gotten myself into. The drive back to my place felt surreal. I kept replaying everything in my head, the job, her offer, my unexpected decision to say yes. I pulled into my tiny apartment complex, parked my truck, and rushed inside. I peeled off my work clothes and stood in front of the mirror for a long second. What are you doing, Nick? I whispered to myself. I threw on a clean pair of jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and my best pair of sneakers. I sprayed on a bit of cologne, just enough, nothing obvious, and ran my fingers through my hair. The clock was ticking. By the time I pulled back into Karen's neighborhood, the sun had slipped behind the hills, and a deep orange glow blanketed the sky. Her silver convertible was already in the driveway, top down, gleaming under the soft evening light. I parked my truck, stepped out, and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Karen stood there wearing fitted jeans, a flowy light blouse, and sandals. Her wavy hair fell just below her shoulders, and a soft fragrance hit me as she smiled. She looked effortlessly beautiful. You made it, she said warmly. I was starting to think you'd change your mind. Not yet, I replied with a grin. She laughed and grabbed her small leather purse off the side table. Come on, let's get out of here. We walked to the car and I climbed into the passenger seat. The leather seats were cool against my skin as the breeze floated in. She started the engine and backed smoothly down the long driveway. We didn't speak much at first. The music played low as she drove down the winding coastal road. The last bit of sunlight danced off the water. I don't do this often, she finally said after a few minutes. Me neither, I admitted. That's why I wanted to, she smiled, glancing over at me. Sometimes you need to remind yourself life is more than schedules and work. I nodded, not quite sure what to say. I was still trying to figure out if this was a date or just two people escaping routine. The first stop was a small beachfront bar she knew tucked between tourist shops and ice cream stands. We walked in and I immediately felt underdressed compared to the trendy crowd, but Karen seemed completely comfortable. We found a booth near the window. The bartender brought her a glass of white wine and me a soda. The conversation picked up easily again. We talked about everything, work frustrations growing up in Southern California, awkward first jobs, even embarrassing stories from high school. At some point, I forgot about the strange circumstances of the evening. Karen had this way of making you feel like you were exactly where you were supposed to be. As we walked out of the bar later, the night air was cool and salty. The street was alive with soft music, laughter, and the distant sound of waves crashing. Are you tired? She asked, unlocking the car. Not really, I said. Good, she smiled. I have one more place in mind. She drove us out of the town along the quiet coastal highway. After about 15 minutes, she pulled off onto a small overlook. The ocean stretched endlessly before us under the moonlight. We sat on a wooden bench looking out at the water. The sound of the waves was calming, and for a while we didn't speak. Then she broke the silence. Do you know why I really asked you to come out with me tonight? I turned to her curious. Because I haven't laughed like this in a long time, she continued softly. I spend so much of my time building walls, keeping people at a distance. Tonight felt easy. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded slowly. And you, she asked? Are you having fun? I smiled. Yeah, I am. I didn't think I would, but I'm glad I said yes. Karen leaned back, pulling her light jacket a little tighter around her shoulders. I know this might sound strange, but I needed tonight. I needed to feel alive again. Thank you for coming. I looked at her, and for a moment we just held each other's gaze. There was nothing overly romantic or dramatic, just a quiet understanding between two people from different worlds who found common ground. We sat for a while longer talking about life, about how quickly things change, about regrets and dreams. The conversation drifted naturally like the waves below us. Eventually Karen stood and stretched. Come on, let's head back. I don't want to keep you out too late. We walked back to the car, and the drive home was peaceful. The city lights twinkled in the distance. Neither of us felt the need to fill the silence. When we pulled into her driveway, she killed the engine and turned toward me. I had a great time tonight, she said softly. Me too, I replied. She hesitated for a second before smiling again. I know I said no expectations and I meant it, but would you like to come in for a bit? I made coffee earlier, or tea if you prefer. I looked at her, reading her expression. There was no pressure, no hidden message, just kindness, and maybe a little bit of not wanting the night to end. Sure, I said. Coffee sounds good. We got out of the car and walked toward the house under the soft glow of the porch light. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't overthinking it. I was just living in the moment. The house was quiet when we stepped inside. The soft glow of dimmed lights and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted us. Karen motioned for me to take a seat at the large kitchen island while she grabbed two mugs from a cabinet. You take it black or with cream and sugar, she asked as she poured. Black's fine, I replied. She slid a steaming mug toward me and leaned casually on the opposite side of the counter. I wrapped my hands around it, the warmth comforting against the cool night air, still clinging to my skin. I'm glad you agreed to come out tonight, she said. You're not like most people. I chuckled. How so? Oh, you actually listened, she said, her tone soft but sincere. You weren't staring at your phone or pretending to care. You just listened. I smiled faintly. Maybe it's because I don't get a lot of time to sit and talk to anyone either. Work keeps me busy. She nodded knowingly. I understand that more than you think. We sipped our coffee and the conversation drifted again. We talked about everything and nothing. The craziness of LA traffic, the best tacos in town, how neither of us could understand the current obsession with avocado toast. It felt effortless, natural, like two old friends catching up after years apart. As the clock crept past midnight, I stood and stretched. I should probably get going. I've got work in the morning. Karen hesitated, then smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd stay a little longer. I froze. What do you mean? Relax, she laughed softly, seeing the look on my face. Not for anything like that. I just meant I was thinking of doing something a little crazy, something I haven't done in years. I raised an eyebrow. Like what? She walked over to the large glass doors leading out to the backyard and pulled them open. The cool night breeze drifted in. Come on, she said, motioning for me to follow her outside. We stepped into the backyard. The pool's surface shimmered under the moonlight. She kicked off her sandals and dipped her toes into the water at the edge of the pool. I used to love late-night swims, she said with a nostalgic sigh, but I haven't done it in years. Always too busy, always thinking about the next day. You said earlier you don't do wild things. Well, neither do I. So what do you say? I hesitated. You mean go swimming now? She grinned. Why not? I laughed nervously. I don't have a swimsuit. She shrugged playfully. Neither do I, but who cares? We'll keep it decent. Just roll up your pants and get your feet wet. At least the spontaneous side of me, the side that had been locked away by schedules and responsibilities, suddenly took over. I slipped off my shoes and socks, rolled up my jeans, and sat next to her on the edge of the pool, dipping my legs into the cold, refreshing water. Karen sighed contentedly. See, doesn't that feel good? It does, I admitted. You were right. For a few minutes, we just sat there in silence, staring up at the stars. The occasional distant sound of traffic, the chirp of crickets, and the gentle lap of water against the pool's edge were the only sounds. Then she spoke quietly. This is the first time in a long time I've just stopped. No meetings, no emails, no plans, just this. I glanced at her. The moonlight highlighted her soft features, her calm expression. She looked peaceful, far from the poised, polished businesswoman who had answered her front door earlier that day. I don't do this either, I admitted. It feels weird, but good. She turned to face me, her green eyes searching mine. I know this is unusual, Nick. I know we come from different places, different lives, but tonight has been the most fun I've had in years. I smiled softly. Same here. We sat in comfortable silence again until Karen stood and shook out her legs. All right, before I completely lose feeling in my feet, I'm going to make one last offer. I stood too, slipping my shoes back on. What's that? She folded her arms playfully and smiled. I have a crazy idea. You can say no and I won't be offended. What if we just kept going? Kept the night going like we're teenagers who don't have to worry about tomorrow. Grab a blanket, drive out to the beach, watch the sunrise. I stared at her, surprised by the suggestion. Are you serious? Completely, she replied. You said you never do stuff like this. Neither do I anymore. Let's break that rule, just once. I thought about it for a moment. Every part of me wanted to say yes. All right, I said with a grin. Let's do it. Her face lit up with a genuine, almost childlike excitement. Perfect. I'll grab the blanket. A few minutes later, with a blanket in the trunk and a thermos of hot coffee, we climbed into her car again and pulled out of the driveway. The streets were nearly empty, the city quiet in that strange, peaceful way only late nights can be. We didn't talk much during the drive. The wind whipped through the open windows as Karen sped down the Pacific Coast Highway. I watched the white lines blur under the tires and felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. The beach was dark and empty when we arrived. The moon reflected off the water. We spread the blanket on the soft sand, sat down, and wrapped ourselves against the chilly breeze. The ocean waves crashed rhythmically, and we just sat there side by side, watching the horizon slowly shift from black to deep indigo. As the first hint of pale gold crept into the sky, Karen rested her head lightly on my shoulder. Thank you for this, she whispered. I really needed it. I smiled quietly, staring out at the vast ocean. Me too. The sun peeked slowly over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the rolling waves. We sat there in silence, watching the sky shift from deep navy to warm pastel orange. The breeze was cold but refreshing. Karen hadn't moved her head from my shoulder, and I didn't want her to. I had never watched a sunrise like this before, especially not with someone like her. I wasn't sure what we were or what would happen next, but for that moment, nothing else mattered. Eventually, Karen sat up, rubbed her arms to shake off the chill, and gave me a sleepy smile. We should probably head back. You have work, remember? I laughed softly. Yeah, my boss is going to think I vanished. She stood brushing the sand off her jeans, and I helped fold the blanket. We walked back to the car quietly, not because of any awkwardness, but because neither of us wanted to break the spell of that perfect, peaceful morning. The drive back was quiet. Karen kept one hand loosely on the steering wheel and the other resting casually on her lap. I stared out at the coastline, my mind still trying to process the last 12 hours. When we pulled into her driveway, the warm California sun was already burning off the morning haze. I stepped out, grabbed my backpack from the back seat, and turned to face her. Thank you for last night, I said sincerely. I've never done anything like that before. Karen smiled, resting her arms on the top of the car door. I should be thanking you. I haven't felt this alive in years. We stood there for a moment, neither of us wanting to be the first to say goodbye. Then she broke the silence. Listen, she said softly, her expression thoughtful. I know you have your life, your job, and I have mine. I'm not asking for anything complicated. No expectations, no labels, but I'd like to see you again, if you ever want to, if you ever have free time. No pressure. I smiled slowly. I'd like that. Her smile widened, her eyes softening. Good. Well, you better get going before you're late. I nodded, stepped back, and started to my truck. But halfway there, I stopped and turned. Karen, yeah. Would it be okay if I texted you later? She laughed lightly, leaning against her car. You better. I grinned and waved before climbing into my truck and driving off. The drive to my next job felt surreal. I couldn't stop thinking about how the most ordinary workday of my life had turned into one of the most unexpected, unforgettable experiences I'd ever had. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from her before I even finished my next appointment. Over the next few months, our arrangement became a quiet, unspoken routine. I'd stop by occasionally after jobs. Sometimes we'd grab dinner. Sometimes we'd just sit by the pool talking for hours. Other nights we'd take long drives along the coast, just like that first night. We both kept things simple. We never defined what it was. We both agreed early on we didn't want to complicate each other's lives. There was never any jealousy drama or unrealistic expectations. It was just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I didn't tell anyone about Karen, not my friends, not my coworkers. It was something private, something only we shared, and I think that's what made it special. Months passed and nothing changed. I kept working, kept showing up for my jobs like always. And occasionally when I had a free evening, I'd get a text from her. If you're not busy, come over. I've got coffee or wine. And I always did. As I sit here now, thinking back to that first day, the job ticket, the long driveway, her voice teasing me by the pool, I still smile. I didn't know it then, but that day would quietly change my life in small, unexpected ways. We never became a couple, not in the traditional sense. We never introduced each other to friends or family, but we became something even better for a time, two people who filled a little emptiness in each other's lives. And even now, as I still get the occasional message from her, I know I'll always remember that day, that woman, and the simple sentence that started it all: you're making it hard for me to be good. The story of Nick and Karen offers a heartfelt life lesson about the transformative power of stepping outside our routines to embrace spontaneous connections. It teaches us that life's most meaningful moments often arise unexpectedly when we dare to break free from the monotony of daily responsibilities. Nick, a young pool cleaner, and Karen, a successful but lonely woman, found solace in each other's company, not through grand gestures, but through simple, authentic moments, sharing a meal, laughing at a bar, or watching a sunrise. Their story reminds us that human connection, however fleeting, can fill the emptiness we often ignore in our busy lives. It's a call to listen to others without judgment, to seize opportunities for joy, and to cherish the small, unguarded moments that remind us we're alive. While their relationship remained undefined, it was grounded in mutual respect and understanding, showing that sometimes the absence of labels allows for genuine bonds. Life is too short to stay trapped in predictable patterns. Sometimes saying yes to the unknown can lead to profound personal growth. Please share your thoughts in the comments. When was the last time you took a chance on something spontaneous that changed your perspective? Your stories inspire us all to live more fully. If this tale touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to join our community of emotional storytelling. Let's keep discovering life's unexpected lessons together.